Shalom and welcome back to In the Beginning radio program. I'm Rabbi Eric Tokajer with Brit Am Messianic Synagogue in Pensacola, Florida. My co-host,
Wayne Leland, Rabbi of Am Israel Messianic Synagogue in Navarre, Florida.
And we're so glad that you've tuned in this morning. The phone numbers to join in the conversation, 623-1330, 623-1330, or you can post comments or questions on our Facebook page, In the Beginning Radio Program. That's In the Beginning Radio Program. I'd like to thank once again Jonathan Lane, Tamara Alexander, and Natasha Krauss-Reynolds for that beautiful song that opens and closes our program. And you can find more about Tamara and Natasha and Jonathan and others by going to psalmplace.com. That's psalmplace.com, where you'll not only find the music of Tamara and Natasha, but also over 60 other Messianic artists, music available for you to listen to samples of and purchase so you can have your own copies of it. Once again, we're so glad that you've tuned in this morning to a program dedicated to sharing the Word of God and the things of God from an in-the-beginning perspective. In other words, we start reading at the book of Genesis and work our way through the book of Revelation, building teachings and perspectives line upon line, precept upon precept, not just pulling verses out of context to formulate our own belief system, but looking at the Word of God based on a first usage perspective. The first time something is mentioned starts the process, and then we build up upon that as we go along. I wanted to start with a question that came in on our Facebook this morning, and it says this: I have a question. I have a question for a rabbi outside of the rabbis I usually hear from, which leads me to you. What is your opinion on the role of Gentiles within our movement, or the Messianic movement? I hear a great deal from those who essentially wish Gentiles find a different spiritual home, and that synagogues, Messianic synagogues, should only be for Jews. Personally, I believe, and this is still the writing of the question, personally I believe in Jewish worship led by Jews in a Jewish space, but I see that God calls many Gentiles, including the writer of this question, into the midst to be a part. I also believe they do in a conversion process for Gentiles to enter fully into the Jewish world. So this is actually a series of questions, so we're going to go through one at a time and try to cover them throughout as we go through each section of the question. First, what is the role of Gentiles within our movement? You know, Rabbi Wayne, there are a lot of people that for some reason seem to be offended at times by the word Gentile being used to describe them. And if you read on the Internet, you'll find all kinds of posts and writings and such that say that you shouldn't refer to a non-Jewish believer as a Gentile once they become a believer, because the word Gentile means people from the nations outside of Israel, and once a non-Jewish person accepts Yeshua, they become part of the Commonwealth of Israel and shouldn't be referred to as Gentiles anymore. The problem with that is by the time we see the writings, for instance, of the Apostle Paul, of Rav Shaul, the word Gentile, the meaning has become a more inclusive meaning. In other words, Paul talks about Gentile believers and uses the term Gentile to refer to them, rather than being used just to describe those outside of Israel and versus those inside of Israel. The word Gentile has become a word that includes Gentile believers or people that are of non-Jewish background. So the word Gentile is not in and of itself an offensive term. It is, by the time we read the writings of Paul and others in the Brit Chadashah, or the New Covenant writings, being used as a term to differentiate between those born Jewish, who are part of the believing community, and those born non-Jewish who are part of the community, biblical community or believing community, in order to differentiate between the roles that they have within the same community. And ultimately, the problem arises when we have a growing Gentile populace of believers, which ultimately in the late 100s leading on to the ultimately in the 300s, a total separation of Jewish believers from Gentile believers and the formation of what becomes the Universal or Catholic Church, which has, by the time we get to the 300s, disavowed all connection to a biblical form of Judaism, changing Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, doing away with the feasts and festivals and replacing them with